Well, good morning, everyone. It was great to see all those good mornings on the chat. I think folks have a lot of energy this morning, so we're excited to have you join us and really looking forward to today's conversation. Today's a special day. Year round, we at United Way work to do everything we can to work with our partners to make neighborhoods stronger across our Chicago region. And yet on a day like today, it's an opportunity to stop and pause and reflect. To reflect on what's been accomplished, but also to reflect on how much further we have to go. It's also an opportunity, though, to learn. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about today is that we get the chance to learn every single day about the incredible region that we live in. And we're going to have the opportunity to learn from two people here today who embody our region, who are from our region, and who really can help share the story of our region. And so I'm honored to be able to kick us off. And I realized I didn't introduce myself, so I'm Sean Garrett. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. But I'm honored to get to introduce first Shermann Dilla Thomas. Dilla is going to be our speaker and our panelist today. For those who haven't been following the news, he is what is called a TikTok star, urban historian, but he's blowing up everywhere. I don't know if you've seen it. He's has Netflix is reaching out to him. He's got all kinds of things that are happening in his life, and he's going to be sharing with us a little bit about his perspective and experience. Some things I thought that were really cool is one, he's a father of 7. I don't know how you do that. That is a lot of work. My 2 boys are on this call today watching us, and they're a lot of work. So 7 is impressive. He's also, though, a resident and longtime or native of the Auburn Gresham neighborhood, one of our neighborhood networks in a place that I think is one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in the entire city. And so excited to hear more, Dilla, about your experience and what you've learned growing up in that neighborhood. He's also a proud union member working at ComEd. Before we started today, he was telling me a little bit about what he does. And, we're all grateful to have folks like Dilla who are out there in all the elements to ensure that our electricity is running. So Dilla, thank you for what you do, and all the members of IBEW. You guys do quite a bit to make sure that our community stays safe and stays strong. And so thank you for that. Joining Dilla is our very own Tamiya Aurel. She is an incredible friend and partner. She is a native of the South Side, grew up in Chatham. She tells us stories all the time about what it was like to grow up there and her experience and how much she loves the city. She leads our people and equity work here at United Way. But more than anything, she helps drive our culture. She helps us make sure that we stay grounded in the work that we do in community, and that we're trying to bring some of the best people in our community to come work with us at United Way. And so she's really going to help drive our conversation today. But we are so excited to have the two of them with us to help kick us off. And so Tamiya, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to all of our neighbors who are joining us. I see over 309 of you have joined us this morning. What a great way to kick off your MLK Day with us. As Sean said, I will be having a great conversation with Shermann Dilla Thomas. My team and I have gotten a chance to get to know him over the past couple of weeks as we prepare for today. And I'm super excited to have this conversation, to have him tell us more about himself and about little known facts related to Dr. Martin Luther King. So Shermann, let's get into this. Welcome, good morning.
And good morning.
Good morning to you. As Sean said, you have been blowing up. And as we were prepping this week, the Netflix information came out, so we're super excited to have you here. But we want to know a little bit more about you. Tell us about you, where you're from, and how you became to be the urban TikTok historian.
Well, thank you again. I'm very honored to be here. Very excited to be in partnership with United Way of Chicago. Very appreciative of the work you guys do in communities throughout Chicago, and particularly where I'm from here in Auburn Gresham. I am a lifelong resident of Auburn Gresham. Besides going away to college, went to Eastern Illinois University. But I've been more or less near 81st and Racing my whole entire life. Public schools, educated, went to a Calumet High School, and then attended an alternative school, which was housed in Olive Harvey Middle College. What I would say what made me or led me to becoming a historian is that particular upbringing. I'm a son of a Chicago policeman. He was a police officer for over 30 years. He was involved in a lot of amazing things. He was a Vietnam veteran, but most famously, he was a part of Harold Washington and Eugene Sawyer's mayoral bodyguard detail, which gave him access to a lot of the city. And he would bring that access home to me and talk to me about Chicago endlessly, quizzing me on the Chicago grid, quizzing me on historical events. And, you know, passing those quizzes came with benefits, right? If you couldn't lay out the grid for him properly enough, you weren't going to drive his car. And so I was a motivated learner for sure. But then also, as we were talking before this call, some of the jobs I've had helped me become an urban historian. I was a lifeguard for the Chicago Park District. I worked on every side of the city. I got to know communities through the kids that swim in Chicago Park District pools. Starting at ComEd, I started off as a meter reader. You learn a lot about the city and people's backyards. But ultimately, I've just been inquisitive about the city my entire life. You know, I'm one of those people who need to know why Hostage Street is named Hostage Street, right? Or if I identify that several buildings downtown look the same, I'm for sure going to figure out who the architect is. And that type of thinking has and I guess a good memory, right, has led me to where I am here. That and then an 8-year-old daughter who wanted to be on TikTok. And in order to kind of turn her, if you will, you know, 8 is a little young for TikTok, right? So as opposed to her being on there dancing, I thought it'd be cool for her to disseminate Chicago history facts I was going to feed her. Mm-hmm. And she didn't think it was cool. And I get to prove her wrong every day, which is awesome as a parent.
That must be awesome for her right now, seeing her dad blow up the way he has. So congratulations to you. And I can certainly identify with the upbringing that you're speaking of, with having your dad be a part of you learning about Chicago and about its history. I grew up in a household where my dad took off the 15th of January every year before MLK Day was a holiday. So I grew up knowing that this day had great significance and the man had great significance. And so today I want you to give us a little bit more background. You know, we all know that today is the day that we celebrate Martin Luther King and his legacy. And most of us are familiar with Dr. King because of the Montgomery bus boycotts and all of the demonstrations and marches, you know, that eventually led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But in '66, Dr. King brought his work north and came to Chicago for the Chicago campaign. What can you tell us about that movement and what led Dr. King to Chicago?
Well, again, a very excellent question. Thank you for it. Tamiya, but I would caution, though, before 1966, Dr. King had a presence here in Chicago. And so, like I famously say, right, all cool things about America, all dope things come from Chicago, and it's including Dr. King. His mentor, if you will, his spiritual mentor was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Benjamin Mays. Dr. Benjamin Mays received his PhD here at the University of Chicago, and he was here as early as the 1920s and 30s. He was an associate minister and assistant to the pastor at Olivet Baptist Church, which is a historic and famous church here in Chicago. And so Dr. Mays was also a Pullman porter, which afforded him the ability to travel the country and learn various things. And as Martin Luther King Jr. was his mentee, certainly he was introduced to a lot of Chicagoans. Chiefly among them would be like Thomas Dorsey and Mahalia Jackson. And so Dr. King had a Chicago relationship with a lot of people. But in 1956, the late, great Dr. Tamiya Black invited him to speak in Chicago for the first time ever. The first Unitarian church on 56 and Woodlawn invited him, but the commotion got so big, eventually the University of Chicago had to take it over. His first major speech here was at Rockefeller Chapel. But since then, that's 1956, he maintained a relationship with Dr. Tamiya Black. Dr. Tamiya Black was in head of the Chicago group going to the March on Washington in 1963, right? And so before 66, King was always concerned about what was going on in Chicago, and he had relationships with Chicago luminaries. In 66, however, is when he's invited here by a gentleman by the name of Al Raby. There's a famous picture of Bernie Sanders being arrested here in Chicago, he's protesting Chicago public schools not wanting to integrate Chicago school neighborhoods. He was invited here. He participated in that protest because of Al Raby. So Al Raby was making a name for himself. He also was in communication with Dr. King. And so at his invitation, Dr. King comes up here to fight what was a very serious fight, despite the Supreme Court in 1950 saying that racial covenants was not constitutional, despite the Fair Housing Act, despite the Civil Rights Act. Still here in Chicago neighborhood, real estate developers and agents, and sad to say, some Chicago residents were still very resistant to integrating their neighborhoods. And it wasn't like you think of today, right? It kind of, or a very practical person, it makes sense, right? If a certain element of people are moving in my neighborhood and there's crime or drug selling and that type of stuff, I would probably A, not want them to move there, or B, I would want to move away. But what was going on in Chicago was that Chicago residents were pushing back against doctors moving on their block, right? They were pushing back against famed journalists. We all know the story of A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. That was about Chicago, right? And so that had still been going on despite all these advances. And like I always say, if you can move Chicago, you can move the country. And Dr. King understood that. And so that's why he made this his Northern campaign.
So when he came here, I don't imagine that his response was, he received a welcoming response from everyone, including the Black faith-based community. What can you tell me about the response that he received from them and other political groups?
Again, another excellent question. Sadly, today, right, especially on a day like today, yesterday was Sunday, I'm sure a great majority of our religious institutions preached a sermon about Dr. King and his work. When it was announced that he was coming, the same thing happened. And sadly, Black preachers were encouraging their parishioners to stay away from Dr. King. But there's an objective reason for that too, and it's called patronage. Chicago's democratic machine, it invents that. And if you were a pastor of a Black church, Mayor Richard J. Daley would come to your church and say, hey, if you keep your people away from Dr. King, you know, I got 10 garbage man jobs, 2 fireman jobs, 3 Department of Housing jobs, a couple sanitation jobs, and your parishioners need those jobs because historically they were kept out of them, right? Historically, African Americans were prohibited from joining unions, and so they were already behind. And so while in 2022, it's very easy to say like, hey, Black preachers turned their back on Dr. King, which some legitimately did. I'm not saying that didn't happen. A lot of preachers had to come to the decision of, is siding with Dr. King worth going against the most powerful mayor in the country? In 1966, Richard J. Daley was the most powerful mayor in America without question. And so a lot of that was going on, and you have to make those tough decisions sometime as a leader. Hindsight being 2020, some of them now see that they sided against Dr. King and still did not receive the promises of those jobs, right? And then those, I always like to point out on a day like this and give honor to the Reverend Clay Evans. He was one of the African-American ministers who did step up to support Dr. King. He did so at a time when his church needed repair. Because he stepped out with Dr. King, his repair permits were denied all the way until the day Richard J. Daley died because of how staunchly they were against integrating Chicago neighborhoods. And so it was a very mixed response that he got, that's for sure. It wasn't all out support, but what the support he did have was from the youth.
How do you think that would shape, how would it be now if Dr. King were alive and were to come to Chicago on such a journey? Do you think the response would be the same from the Black faith community, or would there be a difference?
I would hope there would be a difference because we all recognize the need for just unity in so many things, even if maybe denominationally or religiously, right, you may not necessarily have the same ideals, but we all see that, you know, still today in 2022, we have a housing segregation problem here in Chicago. And so I think with leaders like Father Michael Flager, who isn't an African American, but he certainly leads a Black church, and others here in Chicago, I think they would galvanize around Dr. King today, but not just them. Some of the young activists here too. I'm thinking about Jamal Cole and Jamal Green. I'm thinking about My Block, My City, My Hood, My City. And so many other non-for-profits that are doing, United Way Chicago, right? With social media and with the how open the city is technically, right? Just as far as the youth can jump in Ubers and galvanize at a spot if a leader like Dr. King wanted to say protest a particular thing. So I think it would be a lot different.
Okay, so you touched on the way our city is segregated, and we know that Chicago is known for being the most segregated city, and we have the widest racial gap in economic mobility. How do you think the work of Dr. King's campaign over 60 years ago impacted Chicago's Black population today?
Well, on the one hand, it taught us a very valuable lesson, despite a very valiant effort, despite making Chicagoans aware of some really ugly facts about ourselves. He didn't really walk away with any victories because he didn't get anything written down in law, right? Through City Hall, through City Council, through most of the things that happened in that summit in 1966 was really promises that didn't have any substantial bite to him after he left. And so I think today the takeaway would be to make sure you get some legislation passed, right? I'm thinking about how Chicago was very early with our big box ordinance, right? And a lot of civic leaders were behind that. The rest of the country is catching up to $10, $12, $13 an hour, where, Chicago has kind of mandated that at scaling as our minimum wage for a while. And so I think it would be because of the technology, things would work out.
Can you talk about some of the legislation that didn't get passed? What were those promises that were made that never came to fruition?
Yeah, so absolutely, right. And that's another thing I want to point out too, is that so the campaign here in Chicago, right, he started marching downtown. In a lot of places, particularly in the South, Main Street, their downtown, that's the heart of their particular city, their town, their community, right? And so when you march down the heart of something, you pull at heartstrings, and change can happen that way. Here, the heart of Chicago is inside of our neighborhoods, right? And so he learned that a little later on, and the neighborhoods are primarily controlled by the aldermen. And so while he had convinced maybe, or seemingly convinced Richard J. Daley that some things needed to change, maybe he had convinced some of the heads of like the Chicago real estate agencies, he didn't convince the aldermen. And so there was no city ordinances passed that required landlords to be non-discriminatory. There was nothing passed that required, say, schools to keep numbers associated with the neighborhood demographics, right? What they were primarily asking for was to allow African-American students to go to better schools and to live in better neighborhoods outside of their normal districts due to the space that was available, right? And so they made promises that, next budget, we're going to do this, and next city council meeting, we're going to pass that. But as soon as he left, nothing at all really changed legislatively here in the state or in the city, as far as, redlining was still going on, right? So that didn't decrease at all in 1966 and 67. Redlining is the reason why Roseland and Inglewood look the way they look now. And we think of redlining only as the mortgages, right? But redlining was insurance companies too. And so if you got lucky enough to get a mortgage, but you had to get your homeowner's insurance from what I would term like a rinky-dink insurance company, right? Because big name companies redlined their agents and wouldn't allow them to write policy. As soon as your house caught on fire, that rinky-dink company would just file bankruptcy, and not pay out on the homeowner's insurance that you've been paying on for 15 years, right? And so there's a lot of burnout still because of redlining, because nothing was passed legislatively to prevent that, to say that, you can't file bankruptcy, immediately after a fire on this. You have to show just cause. None of those things were going on as it related to Chicago after King left.
Yeah, that, lessons learned when we think back on that. You talked about where you're from, which is Auburn Gresham. And we know that that is one of our neighborhood networks that we work with United Way. The work that you do with ComEd, and just the fact that you were born and raised in Auburn Gresham, you get a chance to see, and you've lived here all your life. And so you know pretty much all of Chicago's 77 neighborhoods. What has this experience growing up in Chicago and living in Auburn Gresham and seeing all of the different neighborhoods, what has that done to shape you as an individual and as a father?
I'm really, really glad you asked that. I like to just say perspective, right? Take a neighborhood like Bridgeport, where it gets a bad name, right? It's almost considered like a sundown town within the city. But because of the job I have, right, reading meters in Bridgeport, you meet people who live there, and you realize that there was a foreman per se in the McCormick Reaper Works factory. It was a foreman when they were digging out the Chicago River. And every single day that foreman was saying, if you don't work harder, African Americans from the South are going to come up here and take your job. You're going to lose your bungalow. And like, hearing that you're fresh from Ireland, you just want to provide for your family, and this person who has a different agenda than it's beating this in your head, like, you may buy into that, and then your friend gets fired and you look to the left and now there is an African American in his place. Like, that's dividing people who have the same things that they want, right? They both just want. It's really about like labor and management, really, but they use race as a tool to divide us. And that tool stuck in many Chicago neighborhoods. I learned that from talking to people, right? That wasn't something that I learned in Chicago public schools, unfortunately. But talking to Chicago people, they could go in their basements and pull out, like, bam, my grandpa worked for the stockyards for 3 generations, grandpa, great-grandpa, uncle. And this is the union pamphlets that said these things, that had derogatory terms from African Americans. Don't you listen to your union stories, right? Like, it gave me such a perspective to leave space for a second chance, right? And I think that's one thing that Dr. King always spoke for. Like, even if you're faced with a very racist situation, institution, like, we don't leave a second chance for that institution to do better, to reverse the wrongs that it may have, either willfully done or willfully ignored, then none of us are the better for it, right? And so I also learned through Chicago's 77 neighborhoods that a rising tide lifts all ships, right? And so I see as different neighborhoods change and get better, right? I seen Wrigleyville change. Wrigleyville was a bad neighborhood in the 80s and the 90s, right? I seen it get better, and I see the opportunity there. I see how many jobs are there. And so being in all 77 neighborhoods has taught me that if each neighborhood kind of got the same level of support and same level of resources, we could all be as good as Lincoln Park or Wicker Park. Absolutely.
The past 2 years have been pretty tough on all of our neighbors with COVID and just the economy. We've seen neighborhoods pull together and do great things to sustain the neighborhoods. For example, the Greater Auburn Gresham Development Council, led by Carlos Nelson, who I'm familiar with, has done and is continuing to do great things in Auburn Gresham. Can you talk a little bit about just what it's like to be in Auburn Gresham and the great things that are going on.
Oh
What
man,
inspired
dude,
you?
don't get me. I hate to cut you off. I love this
Go
place. Right?
ahead, go
A
ahead.
lot of people don't know what the birthplace of the Moderator is. St. Patrick's Day Parade, right? You could be white, black, orange, purple, green. On St. Patty's Day, you want to see the river dye green. You want to have a nice time. You feel really, really Chicago and that day, right? That comes from Auburn Gresham. So I'm very, very proud to be from Auburn Gresham. I love what Carlos is doing. What a lot of people don't know is we got the largest. Well, we have the largest growing number of homeowners in this of home ownership rate in the city right now, like a lot. And we're instituting great common themes, right? So in a lot of blocks on Auburn Gresham, we won't let them board up an abandoned house. You know, so if there's an abandoned house on 82nd and Morgan, instead of boarding it up, the 82nd and Morgan Block Club says, hey, Dilla, you're gonna cut the grass every other Monday. Jim gonna do it. Jim gonna hit snow. You know, right? We're gonna do this. We're gonna do that because this boarded up house attracts bad elements, right? And you know, we want when people come to buy this house, when it eventually hits the market, we want them to know that they're coming into a neighborhood, right? Those small, subtle things are happening in Auburn Gresham, and you can kind of tell the pride. Afro Cafe just opened up on 84th and Halsted, and people from all over Chicago of all nationalities come to Afro Cafe, and I think those opportunities allow for a better city. It changes their perspective, right? So if you are a business, that's another thing too. I want to make sure I say to a lot of our corporate partners, Auburn Gresham is doing it the right way because people like Carlos and myself, now that I have a platform, are charging our corporate partners to give us a little more than lip service, right? Like it's really awesome to have a Zoom on Dr. Martin Luther King Day, but we can count on the United Way of Chicago to like put their money where their mouth is when we have different situations. You know, they're building homes, right? So that same thing too, right? The United Way ain't the only people gonna have a Zoom today. So when you get through with your Zoom, like make sure your corporate dollars go to the South and West Side more than just on King Day. So, but now that rant is over, I do want to say that we've been doing good. I got to mention Father Michael Flager as far as Auburn Gresham goes. The people at Foster Park hold open gyms, and it's like no matter what side of the city you're in, or if you're involved in any type of street politics, you know, they keep it out of that, and that also is growing the sense of community.
Is there anything that worries you about not only Auburn Gresham, but any of our neighborhoods in Chicago?
Yeah, I'm a little worried about what happened in Cabrini Green, right? Like the displacement. If you put up any news outlet about Chicago, it's going to tell you that people are leaving Chicago. But the problem is people are being displaced from the places that they've called home for a very long time. Similar to the thing, you know, housing, right? Like what Dr. King was fighting for. But there's nothing for them to come back to. They haven't been, you know, promises were made by previous administrations, not just the mayor, right? The previous mayor, but previous people in Chicago Housing Authority, that the people who left Cabrini Green would have access to the now beautiful condos and all the other stuff that's going on. And they don't. It's like a return rate of 1 to 10 or something like that. And so then you're putting people who've grown up and come to learn the city, maybe in suburban spaces that don't have access to public transportation 24 hours a day like they do in Chicago. These people that you displaced, you already have kept out of unions for like 40 years, you know, so they're already behind in so many economic kind of areas, right? So I definitely don't dig that. And then lastly, the crime areas, you know, there are certain, I don't want to pick on any neighborhood, but there are some neighborhoods in Chicago that have a very, very high crime rate. And it seems like we're not attacking it with everything. We may be attacking it with more police, right? But are we identifying that these 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders eventually become the people who fall into these criminal statistics? And are we trying to offer them any additional resources, right? Not with the resources that are already there, but additionally. Those are things I think we can work on as a city as a whole.
Thank you, thank you. You talk about displacement, and we're going to get into some Q&A in a second, but when you mentioned displacement, it made me think of just the sheer number of Chicago or just Black businesses that used to be here in the 70s and 80s. I'm thinking of Johnson Publishing, Soft Sheen, Seaway Bank. Chicago Defender, and even when Harpo Studios was here, they were all based out of Chicago. So we once had this legacy of launching and sustaining Black-owned businesses, but it's not something that we're necessarily known for today. Why do you think that is?
Sadly, so people ask that all the time. The people of Chicago support Chicago things. Sometimes Chicago institutions are a little late to it, right? So everything has its ebbs and flows. And sometimes when like Black-owned institutions find themselves on the other side of financial hardship, instead of city and state and federal funding, thinking that Ebony is too big to fail, right? You know, like if other corporations are too big to fail, but sometimes it seems like Black institutions are small enough to fail, right? They don't get the help they need when they, you know, fall on a change of circumstances, right? Thinking about Ebony and Jet Publications, set up to be like paper and print, you know, that's this whole thing they've mastered. And then when the digital age comes, you know, how many people who were tech savvy during the internet bubble offered their assistance, right? Or was their funding offered, right? Those are questions that I think of. I think there's a chance for those things to come back. I'm certainly very interested in being a part of that, right? You guys mentioned earlier with the Netflix things that are going on and those type of conversations about creating content. You best believe that I'm in there like, hey, we got center space on Western. There's no need to go or shoot anywhere. And, you know, I would pretty much like everybody in it to be from Chicago. And then I'm not going to be the guy that like, you know, speaking positive in the universe, right? Everything works out. I ain't going to Hollywood, right? We're going to like try to, you know, continue to teach history lessons here in Chicago. So there are people in Chicago that want that to return, and I think we can scale the right way. We just got to be willing to work together. That's another thing too, right? We all don't have to start our own companies to build a new Black metropolis here in Chicago. You know, if you're good at tech and I'm good at this and I need tech, we can come together and we can start to launch things that way. And then again, those things need capital too. And so as we have amazing corporate partners on here, take a risk sometime, right? Like maybe your profit ain't gonna come back quarter two, but maybe you're gonna grow something that's gonna be sustained. There's an amazing Chicagoan I want you all to know about. His name is Julius Rosenthal. He's the reason why we have the Museum of Science and Industry. He's the former CEO and president of Sears Roebuck. He's the reason why you know what Sears Roebuck is. He's the person that grew the company to its heights. And at the very height of his career, when he was making more money than he could imagine, he was swimming in money like Scrooge McDuck. He left to be philanthropic and he built over 2,000 two-room schools down south. A gentleman by the name of John Lewis went to one, and we all know what Congressman John Lewis grew to be, right? And so I say that to challenge our corporate partners on Dr. Martin Luther King Day too. When you hear about Chicago businesses that have that opportunity to be the next Ebony and Jet, that they're certainly going to need the capital that you have access to that historically African Americans have been denied, right? And saying that and doesn't put the blame on anybody, it just acknowledges the fact that needs to be acknowledged. Once you acknowledge something, you can kind of move past it and make it for the better, right? You know. Your kid got to tell you where they hid the food so you can stop smelling it in their book bag, right? Like this kind of got to go that way.
Great, thank you, Sherman. We're going to get into some Q&A. I'm getting questions sent to me from our viewers, so I'm going to get right into this. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to read them, so forgive me. Jill Baldwin asks or states, over 30 years ago, Charles Feldstein, who died several years ago, told me that he and other Jewish businessmen left work in the middle of the day to escort Dr. King to several downtown meetings because Chicago police would not protect him. It is one of his most cherished memories. Have you ever heard the story?
I have not. I'm very glad that you shared this story. I am familiar that they gave him the police they gave him a permit for downtown, a permit for Soldier Field. And after that, he got no support from City Hall. So I certainly know that it wasn't going to be a police protection. And I'm very glad to hear that our Jewish community stepped up. And it just goes to show you how it works. I was just talking about Julius Rosenwald, and he's certainly of Chicago's a member of Chicago's Jewish community.
Yeah, when you think about how people move around the city now, everyone has their entourage and they have like the security details. You know, it is actually frightening to think that Dr. King was not afforded some of that same security when he was here at such a volatile time. I'm going to go to another comment from one of our listeners here. All right, T. House says, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a proponent for community economic development. With this in mind, what do you think the role of the Black church is in rebuilding marginalized communities socially, educationally, and economically via progressive, substantive, relevant, and sustainable real estate development?
Why y'all let that question through? Like that was just the faces I was making. I was like, oh my goodness, that was amazing. And then you know I got a tour company and I'm gonna want some Black churches to take my tours. You setting me up. But like we certainly have to be, I appreciate that question so much. A lot of times we need nursing homes, right? We need daycares, but a lot of times our churches acquire the rest of the block that they're on. And like none of that necessarily, right? Because what they create don't always create taxes. And then the taxes on property is what we need for so many things, right? Just infrastructure, sidewalks, schools, blah, 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 blah. So if you have land, you're building on something, but you're building on it, and it ain't gonna be something that's taxable. It ain't all, now again, we need nursing homes, we need daycares. I'm not saying that we don't, but to the question, right? As they acquire land, some of that stuff gotta be for like job training. Some of that stuff has to be for like, teaching kids how to code. And even if you build the space for something else, maybe it's a shared space, right? So maybe the day room for the nursing home at night becomes a place where people can come learn how to write JavaScript, or they can come and learn what you need to sign up to be a DoorDasher. You can learn and have somebody walk you through the steps of what you need to do to take your car to learn to get Uber, because those are financial opportunities that benefit everybody, right, if you're living over there. And then also with like business incubation too, right? Like if you are a Black church or institution and you have figured out the grant process, you have figured out a way to sustain your program again. Well, I appreciate your singular program, like Dr. King helped found Operation Bread Basket, right? Like whole city. So if, you know, 5 or 6 Black churches got together and had one big food pantry, maybe they could buy up one of the abandoned schools, right? Like then you got multi-purpose, so it could layer out. I appreciate that question.
Good, I knew you would. You mentioned Wrigleyville and how Wrigleyville has changed from the type of neighborhood it was in the 70s and 80s. But that was due to the neighborhood changing. So how do we balance neighborhood investment without displacing communities, or what we now know as gentrification? Like, how do we maintain a balance there?
That's again a great question. And gentrification isn't all the way bad, right? Like I did, you know, a Whole Foods, right? I didn't know I needed avocado toast until I had it, right? And now I'm like, oh wait, you don't got avocado toast here? Eat gas. Oh my goodness, right? So I'm not necessarily upset with some of the things that come with gentrification. What I'm upset with is that like sometimes people recognize like, oh my God, these 2 flats are amazing, can be converted to single family houses. And because of the economics of this neighborhood, I can get them cheaply. But then once you acquired that, like, don't immediately call the police on the dude that's on the corner, right? Like you don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like be neighborly. So that's just one thing that needs to occur. But also, so think about the space that you're moving into. You know, a big problem is like the 2 flats, the 3 flats, the courtyard buildings that have the storefronts. They were designed in city planning that way. That's why those neighborhoods lasted for 20, 30 years. And what we do is we knock those down and then just put the building that doesn't have access to the grocery store there. So we still haven't like solved the problem. And then you still end up displacing people anyway, because they got to move next to resources, right? And so, you know, it's just about involving the community as you build out, right? As you see this opportunity, this business opportunity to buy this property for A and sell it for B, like there's nothing wrong with going to the PTA in that neighborhood, going to, you know, most Chicago neighborhoods have community organizations, or minimally like go to the alderman and ask for their community liaison to find out what that community needs and how you can be a partner in that community. And then again, like I always say, we all should be invested in resolving our crime issues. And resolving our crime issues, yes, you know, I'm not okay with the dude carjacking somebody on Monday. He's out on bond on Wednesday to do it again, right? I got a problem with that. But I also got a problem that he had no after school curricular from preschool to 6th grade. Like nothing, like no one tried to show him anything. And because of the economics of his neighborhood, his mom got to work from 9 to 5, then she got to come home and Uber too. So he doesn't have, you know, a role model or anything to do. And so, you know, before we immediately want to resolve the back end of it, like as a neighborhood partner, as soon as you start turning a profit in the neighborhood, go spend some time at those schools, right? Go pick one person at a neighborhood school and let them learn what you're doing. It'll radiate out. You know, I think that's how we, and that's what Chicago used to do, you know.
Yeah, an anonymous person sends this next question, similarly related to what we're talking about. So much opportunity for change exists in the city, but what can folks in the suburbs do to support required change? How can we better engage them when they are not directly impacted?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a very hard question, right? Because they're not impacted by so many things. That's why they went to the suburbs to remove themselves from some of the things they may have been impacted by. And I'm not upset with them about that. I just think like caring about the space you come from a little bit, right? If you are in the suburbs now, so it's a fairly good chance the generation before you is from the city, or you yourself grew up in the city. And so there's nothing wrong with maybe you don't got to care about the city as a whole, but you know, if you formerly lived in Chatham and now you live in Olympia Fields, every now and again, go to Brown Sugar Bakery. You know, like it's just that those small things doesn't really take much. It may sometimes be out of your way. And then just like seek out the good in those spaces too. Right, we're all designed for clickbait. This is the world we live in. There's nothing we can do about it. So all the headlines are probably going to be bad headlines just because that's what's going to draw you in to read the story. Look for the good in those spaces that you come from too, you know, right? Like share those stories on social media. Don't always share the crime stats. We know what they are. They suck. They need to change. There are many organizations working to resolve that. But did you share the United Way, Dilla and Martin Luther King talk, right? That was a good thing to share. I seen other things on United Way page that you could share every single day on my Instagram, my Twitter, and on TikTok. I'm posting positive, unifying Chicago images only. You can share that. You don't gotta always be from the suburbs and look for the bad in the city, right? There's still amazing things happening in the city that may, you may have no benefit to you, that there's something going on at the local Boys and Girls Club. Still share that, you know, and those small things matter.
Okay. So I got one more question for you as we bring it back to Dr. King and his involvement in Chicago. What other roles does the city play in the civil rights movement in the late 20th century?
What roles did they play?
What other roles does the city play in the civil rights movement in the late 20th century?
So I say I view the city in like two ways, right? I view the people of Chicago, and the people of Chicago, even in the latter portion of the 20th century, were I'm formally thinking about like Ceasefire was an organization that was doing advocacy work and violence mitigation work. I'm thinking about different other philanthropic organizations that were into like crime prevention. and also into job placement. Our community colleges do some amazing stuff that's so underutilized here in the city. I would consider that stuff civil rights advocacy, right? Like training people to equip them to be prepared in today's world, I think is an act of especially when a group of citizens have been held away from that access, right? Making access to it easy, I consider as an act of fighting in civil rights. As far as the city as a whole go, especially then, which was daily too, you know, he didn't do a very good job with our Chicago housing residents and resolving that. And even in the tearing down of the Robert Taylors and other housing projects that was done, you know, without any kind of heart in mind. I think it was just about creating, you know, removing this blight. And even right now, if you drive where Ida B. Wells used to be, it's still like very, very vacant. And you know, that's very telling in a city that, you know, built a DePaul Center, right? Like the DePaul Center could have went right where the Ida B. Wells was. And that's investment in that neighborhood immediately, right? And not doing that, not forcing isn't the correct word, convincing our corporate partners that this is the best space for these things. You know, the city has to be at the forefront of that, right? The city has to say, yes, you can have several Amazon centers you want, but you got to put one of them on Madison Street, where it's been vacant since the King riots of '68, right? Like that has to be a conversation. You have to say, you have to put one on 115th and Austin. And when you do that, like, things are going to change, right? The neighborhood people are going to get those jobs, and then they're going to tell the other neighborhood people, hey, you can't break in the cars at the Amazon facility, bro, because that's where I work, and they might close it down if you do that. And then Roseland's crime rate has changed, and you can't figure out why, but why is the opportunity you provided?
Yeah, you speak about Robert Taylor. Actually, my grandmother was one of the first residents of the Robert Taylor homes.
Oh, wow.
Mother was born and raised 45th and Federal, so very familiar with those areas as well. And when you go by there now, it's just vacant. It's just vacant. Just
which is a part of like that Chicago population story. Where we don't even have a tracking. No one knows what happened to the families that we've displaced out of Chicago public housing. And I don't think Dr. King would appreciate that, you know. So we still have some work to do. And just keeping our promises to each other. We still got a little work to do in forgiving each other.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're almost at a close, but I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about what we can do going forward. You know, as we think about the way that we started our day, you know, started this day off in celebration and remembrance of Dr. King. Sean's going to come back in a few just to tell our neighbors how they can participate in the service project for the later part of the day. But what do you want to tell our neighbors who are online with us today? What can they do to keep Dr. King's legacy alive and to reinforce his message that he was bringing forth when he came here in Chicago in the 60s?
It's really about opportunities. It's really about our youth. You know, I think everyone listening should do their best to try to afford an opportunity to just one young Chicago person, you know, in some kind of way, via, you know, join an organization or have an organization partner you with the mentee. But that's so needed here in Chicago. I think we all need to, again, allow for second chances, right? I know that's not something that people like to always hear and say, but once we're hit with something that's systemic, right, we need to leave space for that institution to right that wrong, right? If we don't allow them to put in the same amount of time to fix the issue that they broke on the other side, the equation won't be balanced. I think we all should try to, just focus on the good sometime, right? We're all in our phones, we're all on social media, we're all inundated with these really horrific stories, primarily about Chicago. But even when you're looking at the news on Chicago, it's probably like one neighborhood, one block of one neighborhood that's having some problems, while the rest of the city, people are doing amazing work to try to make the place better. And if we highlight those that are doing good, if we highlight those who are following the teaching of people like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., if we put them in front of more people, I think that helps to change the city. And so that's why I'm really, really honored that you guys allowed me the space today. And then lastly, just not, pick 77 neighborhoods, and so King came here to integrate our neighborhoods. And while you may not live in Roseland, or you may not live in Chatham, or you may not live in North Lawndale just opened up Vegan World, and it'll be amazing for you to go over there and make a purchase. No matter what part of the city you're from, being proud of our Chicago is a way that we can honor our city. And the way to honor Dr. King is simply to volunteer your time. That's the most expensive commodity that we have. And with our phones, it's a little easier to do, so try to volunteer your time to help someone.
Thank you so much. And I want to give you an opportunity to let everyone know how they can follow you, how they can connect with you. We've got a couple questions about, do you have an email? Do you have contact?
Yeah, absolutely. I got a website. It's all a catcher. You can get all my social media and my email on my website, ChicagoMahogany.com, Chicago, MAHOGANY.com. I'm on social media.
I see your branding. You got it on this morning.
It's so weird to have yourself on the shirt, but
That's right.
Here I am, right? But then also I'm on all social media platforms, the number 6 FIGGA_DILLA. I encourage email me, send me a message. I've been getting a few of them. It takes me a minute, but I reply to as many as I can.
Great. Well, thank you, Sherman, and thank your daughter for the inspiration to have you start this journey. You are certainly a gem for us to have from Chicago, and I hope we're going to hold you to it. You said you're not going to Hollywood, so we can say right you win. So yeah, thank you so much, Sherman, for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me again. I hope everyone has an amazing day.
Thanks so much. And I think Sean's going to close us out.
Great. Well, thank you, Tamiya, and thank you, Dilla. Really appreciate everything that you all were able to share today. You've got so many great compliments going through the chat right now. It's just awesome. I think everyone's having a really good time. So thank you for making that time for us today, and thank you for everything that you do, and for just the just the perspective, being able to share both the history and the context, but then, as one of the messages said, just the practical realities of here's the way we can move forward. We really, really appreciate that. And so for all of us today, as Tamiya mentioned, we do have an opportunity for those who are interested to join on, to be able to create a service opportunity. There are simple ways and kits that are needed all throughout our region. If you click on this link here, you'll be able to get the instructions. It will also include list of items that are needed, as well as links to various places for the projects to be dropped off. And so we encourage anyone who is interested to follow the links and learn more about the opportunities that we have. These are just a couple of the examples of the various packs that are needed by our partners all across the region. And these are simple ways for families that can get involved. And so we just want to end here the way we started, which is to say thank you. Thank you to Dilla for making time. Thank you to Tamiya for leading us through this conversation. Thank you to the team that helped bring this event together. This is something that our team has been really excited to be able to share with all of you. But most importantly, thank you to all of you. Thank you for joining us today. You took time out of your day, and we hope that this is one of many ways that you'll be able to reflect on Dr. King's legacy, as well as think about how we collectively continue to move work forward in our community. As Dilla said, there's so many great things that are happening. We really, really want to keep moving that work forward so that our region gets what it deserves, which is the vibrant opportunities neighborhood by neighborhood all across our region. We have other opportunities coming up for you all to join us, and so we welcome you at future events. But for now, we just want to say thank you. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you at future events down the road. Have a great day, everyone.